If you think that combining the support, tankiness, and damage capabilities of a paladin with the panache and utility of a rogue in a single D&D character sounds fun, or if you just like pirates, then I think you're going to really like this video. Welcome to D4. Hey everybody, so here at D4, each week we take a deep dive into one, sometimes two, character builds for our favorite TTRPGs. We theorycraft about them, we crunch numbers about them, not so that I can tell you the right way or the best way to play a character, but to explore one potential way to build a character with the hopes of creating something that's both powerful but also really fun to play in-game. So if you enjoy creating characters for role-playing games almost as much as you enjoy playing the actual game itself, or if you're just looking for tips or ideas on how to build something that you're thinking about playing, then welcome home. This is where you belong, and I'm so glad you're here. So thanks for watching. My name's Colby. Really quick, if you would be interested in getting a written step-by-step guide to this build and all the other builds that I do on this channel, and or if you're just looking for another way to support the channel financially, I'd really appreciate it if you would consider joining as a member. There's a little join button down there. For just a couple of bucks a month, you can get access to the library of write-ups that I create for each one of these builds so that you don't have to go back and rewatch the video or take notes. And it's just a really fantastic way to help me create more and better content. So huge thank you to all of my channel members. I could not do this without you. And for everybody else, I really appreciate your support too, really just being here and watching and subscribing and commenting and ringing the notifications bell and liking. These are all great ways to support the channel too, so thank you. So I am seriously behind on my responses to the Dungeon Dudes multi-classing tier ranking videos. That vacation set me back big time, but it's okay. Today we do one of the hardest classes in the game to multi-class out of. The Paladin. So yeah, here's the thing about Paladins. I'd say that they are one of the best classes to multi-class into, if you can afford the steep ability score requirements anyway, because you get a lot for just a couple of levels. Most predominantly Divine Smite, of course, if you're a melee weapon user. That said, they are unquestionably one of the most difficult classes to multi-class out of. And the reason for that is simple. Almost every level in Paladin gives you something really good. At least for those first 11 levels, right? I mean, you've got to beeline to 5, of course, because extra attack. But then you'd be crazy to jump ship before level 6 because Aura of Protection is one of the strongest abilities in the game. But level 7 is your subclass feature, and that's often very good. And of course, you really need that ability score increase or feat at level 8. Level 9 we get 3rd level spells, so I can't get out before that. Level 10's Aura of Courage is nice, but admittedly I could probably live without it if it weren't for the fact that at level 11 I get improved Divine Smite, and that's a fantastic ability. You see what I mean? Where do you leave Paladin behind and go somewhere else? It's just really hard to justify. And let me be really clear on something here. As a serial multiclasser, someone who loves multiclassing in D&D and finding ways to make cool, powerful builds by bringing pieces in from all over the place, I think this is a really great thing and something I want to see Wizards of the Coast do more of. Kind of talked about this last week, but just to reiterate, giving players difficult choices where you have multiple options but all of them are good is great game design and keeps character building fun and interesting. Now, as Monty and Kelly were talking in their Paladin multiclassing video, watch it here, by the way, if you haven't, there was one idea that they were discussing that intrigued me more than any other.
There is one rogue subclass that suddenly brought the concept to life for me.
Well, Paladins might really like having cunning action to dash and disengage. And if we're dashing, we're charismatic, why not be a poncy elf swashbuckling paladin?
Yeah.
Yeah, a swashbuckling paladin rogue. That sounds really cool. And while I've done plenty of builds where I was a rogue dipping paladin for Smite, most recently in the Assassin's Creed build, I'm pretty sure I've never done a build that started off and was mostly paladin but then dipped rogue. That sounds fun. That sounds interesting. But also challenging. figuring out why I would want to go rogue on this character, aside from story or character concept purposes, which are totally valid purposes, don't get me wrong, but you guys know me. I tend to think mechanics first and then build the concept and story around the mechanics. Not always, but usually. And I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of banging my head against a brick wall for a while with this one, trying to figure out when to leave Pally behind and justifying it to myself. But after a few hours and a few broken bricks, I think I finally came up with something that feels really good to me, both mechanically and conceptually, and has the added benefit of building around a weapon that I don't think I've ever used before, but I've always wanted to. So let's dive in. I proudly present D&D build number 143, the Pogue, the Rogadin, the Swashadin, the Oath of Swashbuckling, the Pirate Priest, the Scurvy Knave. Wait, I know. The Knight of Knaves. Alright, big thanks to my good friend Randall Hampton for the fantastic artwork that he came up with for this build. He does this every week. If you would like to follow him on Instagram or other social media to see what else he's done, and or to maybe reach out to him and see if you could commission him to create some art for your character or even your entire party, I will put links in the video description on how to do so, as always. But before we jump into the builds, I want to tell you guys about Hit Point Press, as they are the sponsor for the video this week. Most of you hopefully know by now that Hit Point Press makes some of the best third-party D&D 5e compatible stuff in the world. Today, I wanted to tell you about their fantastic Fablemakers animated tarot card deck. So, the Fablemakers animated tarot card deck is a fully animated D&D tarot deck that brings your worlds and characters to life in really awesome ways. This deck is full of bright, colorful artwork, inclusive perspective, and TTRPG flair, and it's a must-have for tarot fans. You actually tilt the card to bring it to life with unique animations on every card. But this is more than just a tarot deck. It's actually a powerful tool at your role-playing game table. Along with the tarot deck, you can get the animated tarot guidebook that's 280 pages long and gives you not only ideas on how to use your tarot deck in your campaigns, with tools for both players and GMs alike, but it even gives you a really great primer on the practice of tarot in general, which I found fascinating. You can totally let this deck help you decide how your character might react if the quest NPC gets swallowed by a big bad, drum up a fantastic backstory for your character, and so much more. Now, if you're not particularly keen on tarot, no worries. They have a lot of other animated decks, including animated spells, animated NPCs, conditions, illusions, and more, and they're equally beautiful as these tarot decks. Don't believe me? Well, guess what? They sent me some cards, and I'm gonna show you how awesome they look. Unboxing videos are the coolest. Bubble wrap. The deck of many things, but animated things. These seriously are gorgeous. Ooh, Urail. It's like a Medusa. Look at those snakes. Deck of many animated illusions. No, it's an aberration. The deck of many animated conditions. What? Stunning Strike actually worked? So yes, do yourself a favor and check out these amazing decks by Hit Point Press. I would appreciate it when you do if you would use the link that I'm gonna put in the video description so that they know that I sent you. But also, between now and October 31st, Halloween, if you use the code D4HPP at checkout, when you're purchasing the tarot box set or any animated spell bundle, you'll save $10. Nice. Huge thanks to Hit Point Press. I love you guys. All right, let's jump into the build. So, at level 1 for our starting class, we are going to start off, yes, as a paladin. There are just too many good things that paladins get to delay them, like I've said. As for our starting race, we want to be an elf here, and probably not for the reason that you're thinking. As for the kind of elf that we should pick, I almost want to say pick your favorite. Initially, I was going to go drow to get access to the fairy fire spell, but it just felt a little too clunky. Even though we get to use charisma for our DC, and that's good for us as a paladin, our charisma isn't going to be amazing, unfortunately. And Fairy Fire only has a 20-foot cube area, making it kind of tough to assume that it's just going to always be on our target, whichever target we're attacking for an entire combat encounter, right? Because I am building this character for sustained damage. Plus, as a paladin, we will have access to other concentration-based spells that we're going to want to be using that are going to be really great buffs for us. Plus, rules as written written as a drow, we only get to cast Fairy Fire once a day, so yes, for all of those reasons, I think I'd probably skip drow here and go either Shadar Kai or maybe Eladrin. Both of them get a Misty Step-like teleport that can be used proficiency bonus times per day. And then that teleport comes with a nice sort of bonus, like causing enemies to be frightened of you if you're a Winter Eladrin, or giving you resistance to all damage if you're a Shadar Kai, which is probably the way I'd go, personally. If you feel strongly about being a different kind of elf, go for it. Just make sure you're an elf, okay? And no, half-elf ain't gonna work here. For our ability scores, I assume we're going point by as always, and recommend taking a 15 in dexterity and then a +2 from our racial there, a 15 in charisma with a +1 there, a 13 strength, and a 12 constitution. Now, my original plan for this character was actually to make them a strength-based paladin. Going this route would have allowed us to wear heavy armor without suffering a move speed penalty, and as a frontline melee character, a better AC would be really nice. What's more, people often forget that you don't actually need to be attacking with your dexterity in order to benefit from sneak attack damage, right? I've done plenty of builds, the rogue tank for one, the Cyclaw for another that comes to mind, that take advantage of this fact, right? And yet, I kind of feel like if we're going to be making the big sacrifice that is giving up paladin levels for rogue levels, I want to be able to be a good rogue, you know? So much of what rogues bring to the table comes in the form of utility. And most of that utility, scouting, picking locks, disarming traps, benefit from a high dexterity. So let's go ahead and give up 1 to our armor class in order to be a better rogue. Of course, you don't have to go this route, and if you have someone in your party who's hoping to fill that niche, right, that scouty, lockpicky role, then go ahead and go strength here so you can wear that plate armor if you want. Also, I'm guessing some of you might be surprised at the 12 constitution. You could totally go 14 charisma and a 14 constitution instead. I just like to get as much damage out of my characters as I can, and this is going to help us do that. What's more, it will help our other paladin abilities, of course, like Aura of Protection and things, right? So I feel okay going this route, personally, even if it means we'd be a teeny bit squishier. As for our starting equipment, I'm going to recommend going the gold buy route as usual and grabbing some scale mail and a couple of short swords. We're not going to be sticking with these weapons for long, but they will get us through the first few levels. Plan on doing like 2-weapon fighting for a bit here and making some bonus action offhand attacks. So, as a Paladin 1, we get first up Divine Sense. This lets us detect undead, fiends, or celestials within 60 feet of us who are not behind total cover. Charisma modifier times per day. It's marginally useful at best, but it's nice when you need it. But you know what's way better than marginally useful? Lay on Hands, which we also get at this level, which gives us 5 Lay on Hands points per paladin level that we can use with an action and a touch to heal 1 hit point per point spent, or to cure poison or disease with 5 points spent. It scales great and it's super efficient. A fantastic support ability. At level 2, we get a fighting style, first of all, and as much as it pains me to do so, since we're building this character with a focus on sustained damage, I'm going to assume that we're actually taking the Great Weapon fighting style here, even though it's not great, and we don't even benefit from it with our short swords at the moment, right? I'm not crazy. This wouldn't even be an issue for us if we would have gone strength-based instead of dexterity-based, but yeah, just hang tight. We'll get a little use out of it eventually. Now, as for this Great Weapon fighting style, it tells us that when we roll a 1 or a 2 for damage on an attack we make with a weapon that we're wielding with 2 hands, we can re-roll that 1 or 2. That's not amazing. It will honestly only add like a 0.7 or 0.8 damage per hit on average with the weapon that we're going to be using. The math is complicated, but sure, I am going to assume that we took it here in the interest of exploring what's possible damage-wise. If I were playing this character in-game, I'd probably go with the defense fighting style, I think, instead to add 1 to my armor class, or maybe interception if I want to be a great supportive ally. Blessed Warrior wouldn't be bad either to get some cleric cantrips, so yeah, feel free to go a different route for your fighting style here. Then, of course, at Pally 2, we get the infamous Divine Smite. As you probably know, Divine Smite lets us, when we hit an enemy with a melee weapon, spend a first level spell slot to add 2d8 radiant damage, plus 1d8 more for each spell slot above first that we spend if we decide to upcast it, right? I use Divine Smite all the time in burst or nova builds. For us, I'm just going to assume that we're adding a smite when we crit, since it would double the damage of the smite in that scenario, right? And it's something that Paladin players often do. It's not exactly sustainable to assume that we're blowing a smite on every hit, but I do want to account for it in some way when we're crunching numbers. It's not a perfect method. Sometimes, sure, you'll want to smite regardless of whether you crit if you think that your enemy is close to dying, right? And you're just trying to take them out. But doing this, doubling a smite's damage only on a critical hit, gives me a way to account for it in the sustained damage numbers, and I'm comfortable with it. We also get first level Paladin spells here at this level, and feel free to take stuff like Command or Compelled Duel or some of the fun smite spells even, but the only one I'll say that we've got to make sure we get is Bless. It's one of the best buffs in game, as I often say, adding a d4 to all of the attacks and saving throws for 3 of our party members, including us potentially, for an entire minute. It takes an action to cast, requires a concentration. What I especially love about Bless here is that it just works. No saving throw required, and for our good but not great charisma selves, that's pretty important. Your allies will love you for having this, and it's pretty much always worth an action to cast, and worth upcasting when you can to benefit more party members. Now, at level 3, I want to take our first rogue dip. You do not have to do this here. I know I droned on and on in the preamble about how hard it is to multi-class out of Paladin early on. Honestly, though I wanted to get to Rogue sooner rather than later, the main reason I wanted to do this here at this level is because I think it will work best in our character's story arc. I'll explain in a minute, but feel free to delay rogue levels if you want to. As a rogue 1, we start off with Thieves' Cant, which is the special coded language that all rogues use to leave secret messages for one another. And then we get Expertise, which lets us double our proficiency bonus with 2 skills that we are proficient in, or 1 skill and the proficiency bonus that we get from using Thieves' Tools. Assuming that we are the acting like rogue scout in our party, I think I would double proficiency for Stealth and Thieves' Tools personally, but you might want to do Perception instead of one of those, since we've got a pretty good dexterity already and a lousy wisdom. Maybe stick with Thieves' Tools and ditch Stealth. We're going to be a pirate, not a ninja. Leave the stealthing for someone else. And this will let us still, disarm traps, pick locks, and be a little bit better at spotting those traps and secret doors and things, right? But then rogues get Sneak Attack. Sneak Attack lets us, once on a turn, do an extra d6 of damage if we hit an enemy with either a finesse or ranged weapon and have advantage on the attack, or the enemy is standing next to one of our allies. So that's an extra d6 of damage once on a turn for us now, which will be welcome. All right, now level 4, we're going back to Paladin, so we'd be a Paladin 3, and that means we get our Sacred Oath, our Paladin subclass. And you already know what subclass we're going with, don't you? That's right, Oathbreaker. Okay, so here's how I envisioned the story for our character. We were a good little Paladin, on our way to becoming a force for righteousness in the world. But then something happens that makes us, well, go rogue. I don't know what that is for you. Maybe a high-ranking church official did something to shake your faith. Maybe you got into the whole Paladin thing in an attempt to curb your wayward ways, but then you fell off the wagon. I think if it were me, I would totally be taking the pirate background on this character, and my plan all along was to infiltrate some holy order under the guise of being a true follower of their deity. But in the end, I'm the Knight of Knaves, right? I'm a pirate priest, maybe like Aaron Greyjoy from Game of Thrones, yeah? A priest of the drowned god. Yeah, I like that. So, sure, you broke your oath here when you robbed that church blind, maybe, and that's why we took the rogue level. But maybe you could flavor it like you broke your false oath while staying true to the original oath to the deity that you truly worship. And for the record, I don't think this means you have to be an evil character if you go this route, but you're definitely not lawful good. Know what I mean? Anyways, as an Oathbreaker, we get Oathbreaker spells, first of all, Hellish Rebuke for a nice reaction-based bit of burst damage when you get hit by an enemy, and Inflict Wounds, which is a pretty potent single-target damage-dealing spell. But I really wouldn't plan on using either of these too often. We also get Channel Divinity, like all paladins, which can be used once per short rest for 3 things. Harness Divine Power lets us recover a spent spell slot once per day, and then Oathbreakers get Control Undead, which lets you try and take control of one undead creature. If they fail a Wisdom save, then you have control over them for 24 hours, unless their challenge rating is equal to or greater than our level. That will be pretty cool once in a while, I'm sure, but Dreadful Aspect is the one we'll likely get more use out of, letting us use an action to force all creatures of our choice within 30 feet to make a Wisdom save or be frightened of us for a minute. That's pretty great, though it does make me wish I had a higher charisma score so it would work more reliably. Must resist urge to dip Hexblade. Be strong, be strong. Also, Paladins get Divine Health at level 3, don't forget, making them immune to all diseases. Nice. At level 5, things really kind of come together for us a little bit better, because we'd be a Pally 4 and we get our first ability score increase or feat. And we are going to take Revenant Blade. Say what? That's right. Make sure you grab a double-bladed scimitar by this point, because that's the weapon that we're going to be using for the rest of our career. I love this weapon. I have always wanted to build a character around it. Ever since Darth Maul and Illidan, I've thought double-bladed weapons were just the coolest. But as I pointed out in what was, I think, my first or second ever short, spoiler alert, it's not very short, the double-bladed scimitar tends to suffer a bit mechanically versus other weapon choices, especially polearms, which are considered heavy, and the double-bladed scimitar is not heavy, so no heavy weapon master for us, unfortunately. However, I think for this build, it's absolutely the best weapon for us to use, and I'm thrilled to be able to try and show it off. It's unique in that it does 2d4 damage on a hit, which is slightly better than a 1d8 weapon would do, but better yet, the weapon inherently allows us to make a bonus action attack with it when we wield it. If we take the attack action with the weapon, we can make a bonus action attack with the other blade, right? Similar to what Polearm Master lets us do, doing a d4 of damage. But yeah, no feat required to get that bonus action attack. Nice. And yes, since it's not two-weapon fighting, we're using the same weapon here, there's no reason why we can't add our dexterity score modifier to the damage of that bonus action attack, which is really great since paladins don't get access to the two-weapon fighting style, right? Right. Now, some of you may be thinking, Colby, the double-bladed scimitar is not a finesse weapon. To which I would reply, it is now. The Revenant Blade feat rocks. First of all, you have to be an elf to take the feat. Nope, not half-elf, elf. Also, it's a half feat, so we get to bump our dex by 1, or strength if you went the strength route, right? Giving us a nice even 18. What's more, it increases our AC by 1, which is fantastic since we're not using a shield. At this point, if we had half plate, we'd be at an 18 armor class. 19 if we went with the defense fighting style instead of great weapon fighting, which we totally should have done if we weren't beholden to the spreadsheet like moi. That's a pretty nice AC. But the pièce de résistance for this build is that, yes, thanks to this feat, the double-bladed scimitar has the finesse property when we wield it, and thus sneak attack. Coincidentally, I think the double-bladed scimitar is the only two-handed weapon that can be a finesse weapon. Am I wrong? It really is too bad that it's not a heavy weapon so that we can't use the Great Weapon Master feat, but c'est la vie. Okay. At level 6, we would be a Pally 5, and that means extra attack. So now we get to make 3 attacks on our turn. 2 with our action, and 1 with our bonus action. Right on. We also get 2nd level Paladin spells. Oathbreakers get Crown of Madness and Darkness for free. Both are potentially useful, one to control an enemy, the other to cause darkness, but both require our concentration, and I'm not going to assume that we'll be using either of them. As for the other options available to us, while Aid and Lesser Restoration feel like no-brainers, the only one I'm going to assume we're using to add a little to our damage is, yes, Find Steed. I've kind of changed my thinking on this spell. I used to be like, mounted combat sucks in 5e, so I don't know if you're actually going to get any damage out of Find Steed or not, depending on if it's controlled or an independent mount, etc., etc. But I think I've kind of learned that just about every table out there allows you to have the mount both move where you want them to and attack who you want them to, oftentimes as a kind of a controlled, independent mount hybrid, which, for the record, I think Feinsteed should be treated that way and be kind of the exception to the typical mount rules, personally. Let me know if you disagree and or if it doesn't work that way at your table. So anyway, yes, I'm going to assume that we've got a warhorse here and that it's doing a little 2d6 plus 4 attack once per turn, which isn't a ton with its fairly paltry plus 6 to hit that's not going to increase as we level up, but it's not nothing. All right, at level 6, it is time for our first damage report. Let's talk tactics. It's fairly simple. On round 1, we're casting Bless. This is by no means a waste of a turn. At this point, we can upcast it to hit 4 party members, which might be our entire team, hopefully. Adding a d4 to everyone's attacks and saves, it's totally worth an action. After that, we're simply going to be making 3 attacks against our target, 2 with our action for 2d4, 1 with our bonus action for 1d4. We will be re-rolling 1s and 2s thanks to the Great Weapon Fighting style, adding 4 from our dexterity to each hit, plus a d6 on the first hit, thanks to sneak attack. I'll assume that we are smiting for 3d8 if we crit now that we have second level spell slots, appreciating that you might not have second level spell slots on every fight, right? But we do have Harness Divine Power, and our steed lasts until we dismiss it. It's not like it disappears when we go to sleep or anything, so it could potentially be lasting for days on end. So yes, I will assume that we are getting an attack from our warhorse once per round as well. And thus, against an enemy with a 10 armor class, we would on average do 42 DPR here. And against an enemy with a 15 AC, it would be 34 damage per round. And compared to other sustained DPR builds that I've done to date, that's pretty good. Check the video description to see links to graphs that make those comparisons, right? We're gonna call this like middle of tier 2 compared to other builds at this level, which is a pretty happy place to be considering our tankiness, supportiness, and even some nice little roguish utility that we bring to the table with this character. I love where we're at. Plus, we're a pirate. Or, I mean, at least I'm a pirate. I guess you don't have to be. But I mean, if given the option between being a pirate or not being a pirate, why would you not? Okay, at level 7, I'd love to get back to rogue levels, but I mean, we've got to go to Pally 6 so we can get Aura of Protection, right? This, of course, gives us and our allies within 10 feet a bonus to all saving throws, equal to our Charisma modifier. Now, yeah, we have a +3 to that, so it's not as awesome for us as it would be if we were, say, a Hexblade. I'm trying to hold on to my dignity here, people. And okay, yes, sure, you could totally do a Hexblade dip on this character if you wanted. But know that you couldn't use a double-bladed scimitar in that case for charisma-based weapon attacks until you got to Warlock 3 so you could get back to the blade, right? And that's a pretty hefty investment. So we could stick with one-handed weapons and sacrifice that double-bladed scimitar, but no. I'm happy with the decisions that we've made. At level 8, I'd love to go back to rogue levels, but I mean, we've got to get to Pally 7 so we can get Aura of Hate, right? It's totally the main mechanical reason, anyway, that we went Oathbreaker in the first place. This is my favorite Paladin subclass feature of all level 7 features because it happily gives us a bonus to our melee weapon damage rolls equal to our Charisma modifier. And 3 more damage per attack is awesome, and I'll take it.
Would have been better if we were Hexblade.
Don't forget, though, that this also affects all undead and fiends within 10 feet of us, regardless of whether they are friend or foe, so watch out. At level 9, I'm tempted to stay Paladin for the ability score increase or feat, but no, I have to get off this ship at some point. So let's do that now. Off the ship, get it? We're walking the plank. Back to Rogue. That means we get Cunning Action, letting us dash, disengage, or hide as a bonus action, which will be pretty handy once in a while. And that is going to bring us to our level 9 damage report. Since last check, the only real bump we've had to our damage has come from Aura of Hate, which will add 3 to each of our attacks. Don't, however, discount the wonderful defensive and support boons that we got from Aura of Protection, nor the additional roguish utility that we've got now. But anyway, at this level, against an enemy with a 10 AC, on average we would do 51 damage per round, and against a 16 armor class, it would be 40 DPR. And yeah, we've plateaued a little bit there, unfortunately, putting us more like in the middle of tier 3 compared to other sustained DPR builds that I've done to date at this level, but we are setting ourselves up for great things to come, so don't you fret. At level 10, we would be a Rogue 3, and that means we get our Roguish archetype, our Rogue subclass, and yes, as I've really already said, we are going Swashbuckler. This is one of my favorite Rogue subclasses, thematically at least, if not necessarily mechanically, though there's some really fun stuff that you can do with it. And yes, as for our character concept, it's absolutely the perfect choice for what we have been trying to create. Swashbucklers get 2 abilities at Rogue 3. Fancy Footwork is wonderful in that it lets us slip away from our enemies without taking an opportunity attack, so long as we make a melee attack against them first. It doesn't even have to hit, we just have to try and hit them, then can move away without risk. We will be taking advantage of this eventually, but we also get Rakish Audacity here, which is also really fantastic. First up, it lets us add our Charisma modifier to our initiative rolls. That is perfect for us and means we will now have a plus 11 to our initiative rolls at this level. That's awesome. What's more, it gives us a new way to qualify for sneak attack. Now we can also apply sneak attack if we are within 5 feet of our enemy and no one else is within 5 feet of us. So now you really should be getting sneak attack every single turn without too much trouble. Speaking of, don't forget that at this level our sneak attack does scale up to 2d6 as well. So at level 11, we've got options. Of course we could stick with Rogue or go back to Paladin. I think either are valid choices that bring really good value. That said, I want to give myself a better mechanical reason for taking those Rogue levels. Here's the reality about this pairing of Rogue with Paladin. If our primary concern is to do as much damage as possible, we would be better staying off Paladin all the way until level 11 rather than taking Rogue levels. The sneak attack damage just doesn't make up for the better Paladin spells and improved Divine Smite. Of course, you might want to take Rogue levels so that you can bring that roguish utility to your party, like we've talked about, or simply because you love the idea of mixing these 2 classes, and that is totally fine and valid. I'm not here to tell you that you're doing anything wrong, but for me, I feel, like I always say, beholden to the spreadsheet with these builds, right? In other words, while I'm fine to make a character build with artificial restraints in place in the name of character concept or utility or support or whatever, once I've created something within those constraints, I also feel compelled to try and get the most out of it mechanically, to, I guess, justify those choices from a damage dealing standpoint, right? Or healing standpoint, or tanking standpoint, or whatever we're building the character for. So now that we've got Rogue Swashbuckler levels and a strong Paladin base, I'm looking to make those Rogue levels more beneficial for this character. And I think the best way to do that is with some bacon.
I think the fighter is the bacon of D&D classes.
That is, yes, with some fighter levels. So yes, we would be a fighter 1 here. That means we get second wind, healing us for a d10 plus our fighter level with a bonus action once per short rest. And then we get a fighting style. And I'm going to say we take superior technique. This lets us learn a Battlemaster maneuver and gives us 1d6 as a superiority die to spend on that maneuver once per short rest. The maneuver I want? Brace. Brace is a rogue's best friend, especially a swashbuckler rogue. It tells us that when a creature we can see moves into our melee reach, we can make an attack against them with our reaction, adding the superiority die to the damage. Why is this a rogue's best friend? It is, of course, for the reason that many of you already know. We get to sneak attack once on a turn. Thus, once on our turn, sure, but if we're making an attack on someone else's turn, like we would be in the case of using Brace, or like with an opportunity attack, then yes, we can add sneak attack again. And thank goodness that the recent 1D&D rogue changes are bringing that back, right? It feels like Wizards of the Coast officially sanctioning this here. And here's the beauty about using Brace in conjunction with the Swashbuckler. You still get sneak attack if it's just you and one enemy going mano a mano, right? You can also step away from that enemy without taking an opportunity attack yourself if you first make an attack against them. So our tactics here change a bit to where we're finding a melee enemy in combat, you attack them, then you step back 5 feet. On that creature's turn, hopefully, with nothing else to do and you being the closest target, they will step up to hit you. When they do, you use Brace, making an attack with your double-bladed scimitar and adding the sneak attack to the damage. Voila. Now, of course, the enemy might decide to go attack someone else. Hopefully, your DM doesn't get too metagamey with you about this. I would for sure talk to them before you decide to go down this path to help manage everyone's expectations. But even if the enemy were to go attack someone else, it's very likely that some enemy is going to be approaching you fairly regularly in order to try and hurt you. I guess if that never happens, then congratulations, your character will almost never take damage, so that's a huge win. Now, currently, we cannot consider this damage sustainable, right? Because we only have one superiority die per short rest. But I think we will be able to fix that very soon. So, level 12, we would be a fighter 2, and yes, that means we get action surge, which I just love on every build, really. It lets us take 2 actions on our turn instead of 1, once per short rest, right? But the great thing about it on this build is that it will allow us to throw up Bless and start attacking right on round 1, and that just feels so wonderful. Of course, it could also lead to a nice potential burst or Nova damage round, right? If we needed some on-demand burst damage instead, and we've got Smite, so we're definitely capable of it, though it's not what I'm really building for on this character. At level 13, we would be a fighter 3, and that means we get our martial archetype, our fighter subclass, and yes, I want to go Battlemaster here in order to get 4 more superiority dice per short rest that are D8s instead of D6s, and with 5 superiority dice per short rest now, I'm going to call that reaction attack from Brace sustainable, since my minimum requirement to consider damage sustainable has always been that you can do this amount of damage every round for at least 1 combat encounter. And most combat encounters at most D&D tables last 4 to 5 rounds. Sure, this barely meets those requirements, but considering that you get your superiority dice back on a short rest, I'm hopeful that you'll be able to do this level of damage on most rounds on most of your fights. As for the other maneuvers that we can learn here, as a Battlemaster, we get 3 more maneuvers, and I'd just say to make sure and grab Riposte, as that's the other attack your enemy with a reaction option in case you're not getting Brace off as often as you'd like, right? With Riposte, you get to make a reaction attack against your enemy if they miss you with a melee attack. And with our pretty decent AC, that's going to happen fairly often. Again, adding the superiority die to the damage, right, that you do. And this makes me feel really confident that you should be getting a reaction attack most rounds, so long as you have a superiority die to spare. Now, aside from Riposte, I'd say, pick your favorites. Ambush can be a nice way to improve our stealth checks. Menacing attack can make an enemy frightened of you. Precision attack helps increase your hit chance. Trip attack is, of course, my favorite, letting you attempt to knock an enemy prone and thus give us advantage. I'd actually love to assume that we're doing that here, trip attack, since, sadly, this build doesn't have any way to get advantage reliably. But since we're not using like Great Weapon Master or Sharpshooter and we've got Bless on ourselves, advantage is a little less important for us than it is for a lot of other builds, and we do get more mileage out of a reaction attack each round than we do having advantage on like the second and third of our 3 attacks every round, right? If we were to spend a superiority die to trip instead of Brace or Riposte, Okay, for our level 13 damage report, we've seen a lot of nice gains since last check. We've bumped our sneak attack by a d6 and added a superiority die and sneak attack fueled 4th attack once per round as well, thanks to our attack, step back and let them come to us maneuver that we can easily pull off thanks to our swashbuckling Battlemaster ways. And thus, against an enemy with a 10 armor class here, we would on average do 70 damage per round, and versus an enemy with a 17 AC, it would be 58 DPR. And while this is a nice increase since last check, it does keep us about in the middle of tier 3 compared to other sustained DPR builds that I've done to date at this level. Again, not too shabby, considering that all of those characters were built to do good sustainable damage, and considering all the support and utility we bring with us in addition to our damage, right? Right. Alright, at level 14, again, I think we're at a bit of a crossroads with this character. If we went back to Rogue, we'd get more sneak attack damage, as well as some nice defensive capabilities with uncanny dodge and eventually evasion, plus more utility via another round of expertise. However, we would get more overall damage by going back to Paladin, as well as some better support capabilities. So, what's more important to you? I'm sure you know which way I'm going, but I do think going back to Rogue instead is a perfectly viable option. But for us, as a Pally 8 here, we would get another ability score increase or feat so that we can finally cap that dexterity at 20, which will do nice things for our damage, our initiative, our saving throws, and all of our roguish utility as well. Obviously, you might have wanted to do this a long time ago for all of those reasons. At level 15, we would be a Paladin 9, and that means we get 3rd level Paladin spells. There are a ton of good and important ones to choose from here. Revivify, obviously, for a resurrection option, Aura of Vitality for one of the best out-of-combat healing spells in-game, efficiency-wise. Now, Oathbreaker Paladins get Animate Dead and Bestow Curse, and both of those are potentially useful. Animate Dead, in particular, could add to our sustained damage per round. You get a little skelly, they've got a short sword, right? And thanks to our Aura of Hate, they do some okay damage. Here's the problem. They're really squishy, so it's really hard to just assume that they're just going to be with us all the time, right? Plus, it's a 3rd level spell slot. We only have 2 of those. I've got plans for one of them, and I'd love to have that other spell slot either to maybe smite if we crit, or actually use this spell that I'm planning on using for more than one combat encounter. You could do it, but Animate Dead really isn't amazing unless you're a Necromancer, I think. And in that case, it ends up being broken, like I talked about in my Necromancer Oathbreaker duo team-up build, right? Long time ago. I think I'm out of cards, but there's the thumbnail. If we hadn't been multiclassing so much, or we were multiclassing into a full spellcaster, right, and we had more spell slots, I think I'd feel more comfortable assuming that we had a skeleton or 2 with us. As is, I'm not going to. Instead, what I want to make sure that we are using one of our 3rd level spell slots for is Spirit Shroud. Now, you might not want to use Spirit Shroud. It requires concentration, meaning no bless. For reals, your party will probably be better off having bless on them than they will having you do more damage. I, of course, am working in a vacuum and am doing my utmost to eke out as much damage from this character build as I can, and in that case, yes, Spirit Shroud is going to give us a damage lift. You cast it with a bonus action, which is great, letting us get into damage right on round 1, even if we don't have Action Surge up. And then for the next minute, all of your attacks against enemies within 10 feet do an extra d8 of radiant, necrotic, or cold damage, your choice. In addition, enemies that take this damage can't heal until your next turn, and any creature of your choice within 10 feet of you at the beginning of their turn has their move speed reduced by 10 feet. I really love this spell. And sure, while our hit chance would be lower without bless, adding 4d8 of damage per round, since I'm assuming that we're making 4 attacks per round now, right? Thanks to our brace and repost options, this ends up outweighing an extra d4 to hit. As an added bonus, don't forget that Find Steed tells us that if we cast a spell that affects only us, we can have it affect our steed as well. So now our steed gets a little 1d8 extra damage on their attack every turn too. Cool. At level 16, we would be a Paladin 10, and that means we get Aura of Courage. This is a pretty fantastic support and defensive feature, telling us that we and our allies within 10 feet just straight up can't be frightened while we are conscious. This will be useless in a lot of fights, but amazingly clutch in others, and I really like the feature. But then finally, for us, at level 17, we would be a Paladin 11, and that means, yes, improved Divine Smite, and this is just a wonderful level 11 feature. I wish all weapon-using classes would get a level 11 feature that was similarly powerful. Might not be as good as the fighter's 3rd attack, but it's just a straight-up increase of 1d8 radiant damage to all of our melee weapon attacks. Fantastic. All right. For our final damage report then at level 17, since last check we have capped our dexterity, finally, added a d8 to all of our attacks and our trusty steeds thanks to Spirit Shroud, though it's costing us bless. Here's hoping that someone else in your party has the bless base covered. We picked up improved Divine Smite for another d8 on all of our attacks, and lastly, we could actually smite for 4d8 damage now if we wanted. Again, I'll only apply it on a crit, meaning 8d8, right? With the understanding that using it for a smite is probably ill-advised, unless we were confident that we were about to get a long rest or something, or we just really needed as much damage on this character as possible, etc. But against an enemy with a 10 armor class here, we would on average now do 125 DPR, and against an enemy with an 18 AC, it would be 93 damage per round. And that is a massive increase since last check. Not too surprising, considering we added 2d8 to each hit, right? As a result, at this point, we're kind of in the middle of tier 1 compared to other sustained damage builds I've done to date at this level. Nice. And still bringing a whole host of utility and support with us, as always. So, let's break it down in some final thoughts. Light bulb ran out of juice, had to plug it in, but we're almost done, and I don't want to wait for it to recharge. Okay, the tier score for this build, if you average the damage that they do at all of the enemy armor classes that we calculate for at each of the 4 damage reports, right? Just average it all into one big number, we get a 53. And that puts us right in the middle of tier 2, between the Shadowmaster Monk and the Infiltrator. And that is an impressive place to be. Now, granted, our biggest gains came late for us, so that's kind of something to keep in mind. It might make it feel like maybe they don't deserve to be tier 2 necessarily. I don't know. And, knowing that kind of leads me to this point. There are things that I love about this build and things that kind of bug me. As for the things that I'm pleased with, finally building around the double-bladed scimitar and finally building a dex-based pally, both things that I've wanted to do for a really long time, were really fun, and I feel like we pulled it off pretty effectively. As for the things that I struggled with, it was hard to make it as good mechanically as I wanted to. Not having a consistent source of advantage on our attacks really bothered me. There were ways to get around it, of course, and I talked about a couple of them. Fairy Fire or Trip Attack, but both of those took away from other things we were trying to do and resulted in worse numbers. We could have gone Vengeance Pally instead of Oathbreaker, right? I'm sure some of you have been screaming that this whole last 45 minutes or whatever. But the big problem with Vengeance Paladin is that you only get advantage on one enemy per short rest. So it's definitely more of a burst damage build. If we could transfer that advantage, right, from Vow of Enmity to another target, that'd be one thing, but as is, that advantage is for burst damage. And if I'm suddenly making this into a burst damage build, then I probably want Echo Knight Fighter and some other class for better spell slots, for bigger smites, and now there's just not a lot of room for Rogue, and it feels like a completely different character. But yeah, like I said before, in the end, you're just really not better off from a pure damage perspective taking rogue levels here until after Paladin 11, which is why we saw such a big damage increase in the late game. All that means, I guess, is kind of like I've said, the reason you're going to take rogue levels on this character really isn't because it's like stronger than a straight paladin. And that's always the big question I have when I'm doing these Dungeon Dudes inspired builds, right? The reason you take rogue levels on your paladin is because for whatever reason, you want to play a paladin that multi-classes into rogue. Maybe you need some roguish utility in your group and you want to bring that, but in a slightly non-traditional way. Maybe you're just really committed to the story and concept of a rogadin, right? For us, a pirate priest, the Knight of Knaves. And there is nothing wrong with that. Again, I do builds all the time on this channel that have artificial constraints put on them in the name of character concept, right? Still, I just felt like that needed to be emphasized, I guess. So yeah, is this build better than just a straight paladin for damage? Probably not. At least not until we waited until after level 11 for damage, at which point a lot of campaigns are over, or nearly so. But maybe more glaringly, it's a lot worse damage-wise than if we were to go, say, Great Weapon Master and Polearm Master and focus on strength, right? Not worrying about sneak attack. But it's even worse when we compare to, say, well, if you're going to multi-class, go Barbarian, right? And then we get advantage and rage, among other things. But I mean, you guys probably know that, and I've done that build before. Check it out in the Holy Warrior. No cards left. And yeah, it is amazing, but we didn't want to just do big damage with this character. We wanted to be a rogue because rogues bring things to a party that a paladin just doesn't bring. And for the record, yeah, this does a lot more damage than a straight rogue would have. So with that in mind, I think we created something that's both super fun and interesting and unique, and is super viable still damage-wise. So at the end of the day, I consider it a big win, because this is a character that doesn't just hit stuff. We are buffing, blessing, healing, stealthing, picking locks, disarming traps, and bringing a significant amount of sustained damage to the table, all in a single character. And there aren't many builds out there that are going to be able to say that. So that's the build for the week. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I had a blast creating this, despite all of the headbanging against brick walls that I had to do for a while. I hope you guys know that I love you. You are awesome. Thank you so much for all that you do for me, for this channel. I hope you have a really fantastic day and a great week. And if you don't, I hope you hang in there. I hope that you are good and kind and that I see you again very soon. But until then, take care. Are you guys fans, anybody out there of Gatchaman, Battle of the Planets, G-Force? This is the first cartoon I remember loving as a kid. And it was one of the first anime to make it over from Japan. I think maybe the very first was Star Blazers, but this was like roughly the same time, late 70s, early 80s. And it was so cool. It was like precursor to Voltron or even Power Rangers, where you've got like 5 members and they all like do something cool and they all have their own unique vehicle. Are you gonna waste your time thinking how you've grown up or how you've missed out? Jason right there, he was number 2. He was the best, he was my favorite. Kind of had an attitude. And I was the second oldest in my family, so I was kind of feeling it. I was feeling Jason's vibe. The things are never gonna be quite what you want. Even at 25, you gotta start something. 25? That'd be nice. Actually, no, I take that back. I think I'd rather be where I'm at. But yeah, they totally like... Okay, this is more information than you wanted about Gatchaman, but they totally gutted it for American audiences. And of course, as a 6-year-old or whatever, I had no idea about this, but like they cut out some of the violence and like the swearing and hired Hanna-Barbera, who did like the Flintstones, to do some animation to fill in those gaps from stuff that they cut out. And I even remember as a little kid being like, this looks different. I'm on my feet, I'm on the floor, I'm good to go. Well, all I need is just to hear a song I know. I wanna always feel like part of this was mine. I wanna fall in love tonight. Jimmy Eat World's best song, a praise chorus. I will have words with anyone who disagrees. Unboxing videos are the coolest, as long as you can figure out how to open the box.
Probably live without it if it weren't for the fact that at a level 11, but admittedly I could probably live without it if it weren't for the fact that at a level...
19 if we went with Great Weapon Fighting style instead of Great Weapon Fighting. Sorry. Because they've released now like a original, uncut, unedited version with English dubbing and even subtitles, I think, maybe. Anyway, it's super campy, super cheesy, and super awesome. Gotta check it out. It's half of our rounded up. Paladin does whatever a paladin can. The tier score for this character, if you take the damage that they do at all of the armor classes that we calculate for at each of the... Oh no, Bluey. So close, I'm almost done.